It is the last session on Thursday of a very packed week, so thank you for all staying. I get it. I'm the only thing standing between you and the beer bash tonight, so I'll try to be kind of quick. I think you all know, oh, come on, this clicker thing was just working. There you go. I think you all know I usually do this. These, if you scan that QR code, it's not an orange team exercise. It actually will lead you to notes about this session, and everything that I reference, whether it's a link or whatever, it's in there. You don't have to try to photograph it or copy it down really quickly. So, before I launch into everything, obviously, before I launch into everything, again, thank you, Patrick. Thank you for the whole staff for putting on this event. We're all super happy to be back in person. I think this is my first time on stage in a few years, and I think I'm feeling something I haven't felt in a while. I'm a little nervous, not because of my talk or being on stage, but I think all the sessions this week, all the speakers, great material, presented so well. What a high bar to try to keep up with. So thank you to all the speakers and all the speakers that are going tomorrow, because I know they're going to just kill it. So just want to update you on two things. One of the other things that has become sort of tradition at this conference is a lot of the speakers will build on what other speakers have said during the week. And of course, the later in the week that you go, the more you have to build on. Andrew told this story yesterday about these two hotels. One was trying to win over its customers with technology. The other one was trying to win over its customers with service. So I have a story about my hotel. Yesterday morning, I got up, and very early, I hear this knock at the door. Housekeeping, knock, 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 housekeeping. I said, I don't need housekeeping today. No, don't bother today, thank you. And they went away. So I washed up, went down, got breakfast, came to the conference, sat here all day, and went back and noticed, man, I forgot to put the do not disturb sign on my door. And now I'm pretty neat when I travel, and I don't make the bed, but I'll bring the covers back up because it looks nice. But I left some things around the room, and no do not disturb sign means housekeeping went back to my room and went in and tidied up. So I open the door, and I immediately see the bed is really properly made. Okay, that's cool. They also found my Max Sysadmin t-shirt, which they folded and put at the foot of the bed, along with my banana costume. Very neatly folded and put on the bed. So that's great service. So they have won me over with their service. I will always go back there if they'll have me. They might not have, I'm on some list after this. They might not have me back. The other quick update that doesn't really have a point, it's just kind of an update. In 2018, when I was talking about my hometown, I pointed out that on Google Maps, this part of my hometown was being labeled Swedetown Village. And in 2018, at the time, I said, this is silly. No one in this town would know what that is or ever refer to it as Swedetown Village. And sure enough, 2023, at any Zoom level, that label is gone. No one calls it Swedetown Village. But sure enough, during the pandemic, one day, I went out for my morning bike ride or run or whatever I was doing, and this appeared by one of the parks, this landmark sign denoting this Swedetown, which I thought was really weird. Happy about that, though. And if you scan the QR code at the bottom, it leads to the web page that I had pointed out in 2018 about this Scandinavian group that did midsummer events, and at one point in 1925, raffled off a set of 4 Ford tires as a way to build up some money. They were super proud of this. So no big point there. It's just I always hope to see greater Swedish-American ties. So, I mentioned I'm the only thing between you and the beer bash, and we've all been sitting here filling up our brains all day. So, what is this talk about? Why are you here? Another thing, I did not put these slides in to build off another speaker's talk, but I did have a bunch of AI references in my talk already. And this is, horrifying in all the ways that Midjourney makes things horrifying. But I was looking for a picture of a puppet because I think of, as Mac admins, it's really our job to sort of make our fleet, make our endpoints act like our puppets. We want them to do what we tell them to do. And when you have a whole fleet of machines, they're all like puppets on a string, and you should be able to make them dance in time. And I think we all think we do that. So the question is, how quickly can you affect your fleet? You put a new package into Jamf, you put a new package into Monkey, whatever. How quickly does that get applied? You push out a new profile, whatever it is. How quickly? And I think we all probably have an idea in our mind that we think happens. But in reality, how do you know? How do you know? And the answer is you got to close the loop, which a lot of us don't do. If you're doing it, awesome. I love you. Go to the beer bash early or something. I don't know. The whole point of closing the loop is you do the thing, you make sure you did the thing. And it's even more important if we are slow rolling or canarying to our fleet, where you do the thing to a percentage of the fleet. You got to check if you did the thing. Otherwise, there's no point in slow rolling to your fleet, because if there are errors in what you're pushing out and you don't know it, you're just going to keep pushing those errors out just more slowly, I guess. So how do we do this? Monitoring. And it sounds so basic and so boring. And I think of the talk that Rich Troughton was giving for a while about documentation. It's just so basic. It sounds like one of those things that, like, of course we're documenting, of course we're doing what we're supposed to. And a lot of people aren't, or they're not documenting properly. And monitoring is very much the same thing that I think of. It's like a lot of people say they're doing it, they're not. They're missing the basics, the foundations. So I like this. The small brain is like we start out, we do everything manually. We want to get better, so we start using an MDM. We automate things. We use management product that helps us out. And then, of course, AI. We're going to do everything with AI. It's like, well, you might have missed a bunch of steps along the way. And I thought about this because a real project that came up recently where I'm working was the help desk wanted to build a chatbot, an AI chatbot, to start helping people. And sure, I get it. It's an interesting project, but we're missing so many pieces before we get to that. So how do we do this? And I'm going to spoil it for you. I'm going to give you the ending up front. This talk is pretty much about OS Query and Splunk. I love OS Query. I'm going to keep you on the OS Query path. But Splunk, I like it. It's my hammer. Everything's a nail. Splunk is my hammer. But if you use something else, just in your brain, go substitute your thing for Splunk, whether that's Elastic or Snowflake or Datadog, whatever it is, you go substitute that. So, log collection. It's a big piece of what I want to talk about. And how do you do that? There are tons of ways to go ship logs from your endpoints to your logging infrastructure, your backends. FluentD, FluentBit, Splunk Universal Forwarder. The one I should call out on this list is SalScripts, not only for the use, with Sal. There are some nice little scripts in there that will help you gather data from Monkey or other sources and ship them to some backend. And of course, the last one on that list is always an option, a custom agent of your writing. Sure, go ahead if it makes sense for you. Another way to do this is using your management agents. So you probably already have agents on your machine. Go use them to their fullest potential, whether that's Munki or Jamf or your product, that you're already using. Munki. Before we even get into Munki, I'm just going to say, when the king speaks, you listen. Munki's the king. Munki's great. If you are a Munki user already, and you go to one of your client machines and look in the path library managed installs logs, you'll find a bunch of really useful information that you should be collecting from the machines on your fleet. The app usage logs, super great. It's not quite like the other ones in this list, but I definitely believe that as an admin of a big Mac fleet, you want to know what's running on your fleet. You should be looking to see who's using what the most. But the other three, install, error, and warning logs, are incredibly important. If you're pushing out a package with Munki, how do you know it installed successfully? You have to go get the logs. You have to get the information. If you're a Jamf person exclusively, I'm mentioning it for completeness. There's the metadata that you kind of get from the server logs themselves. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in our endpoints and data from our endpoints. And Jamf has a reasonable API. We want data about our endpoints, not the server. You can use the Jamf add-on for Splunk. It's okay-ish. Webhooks, they're pretty nice. You can use webhooks. And as I mentioned, Jamf has a nice API, so better. Go do it yourself. Go collect that information. And if you're using something else, your product here, just look for a product that can ship logs and activity. Webhooks are really nice. Some products, if a webhook does not deliver, it'll retry. Some products, if a webhook does not deliver, just sort of drops them on the floor. Maybe not great. So I like using a queue like Kinesis Firehose for reliability. And when you pair that with Splunk, they actually have this in their documentation. Like if your Splunk source disappears for a little bit, everything's just going to queue up in Kinesis Firehose. When your Splunk source comes back, it'll just send all the data that was queued up. So you will miss real-time alerts, of course, but you don't miss any data, which is great. So yeah, ideally look for a product that has a good API, because that allows you to build whatever you want. That's what we're looking for. And APIs help us move from ClickOps to DevOps. Super important. Posture collection, it's another one. Super, super, super important. I already gave away the answer to this. There are a few ways to do it. I'm just going to tell you. Use OS Query. It's really the best option. It's fantastic. The only problem with OS Query is it's, at least on the Mac, it feels like it's becoming like Python. Python, you go onto a Mac now and there are like 12 different versions of Python. Like, how many versions of Python can we fit in here? OS Query is kind of the same way. A bunch of vendors are now bundling OS Query as their management agent or way to report back. So you'll end up with a few different versions of OS Query sometimes. But I highly recommend getting familiar with OS Query if you're not already. And the only one I didn't sort of cross out there is, again, if you already have agents on your machine, use them. Use them to your fullest potential. That's kind of what they're there for. They might be a nice extra signal for you. Since I'm talking about OS Query so much, if you're not already familiar with OS Query, their webpage calls it an operating system instrumentation framework for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. That's a mouthful. I don't entirely know what that means, but the short version is it lets you query your operating system like an SQL database. So if you know SQL, you can reason about your system with SQL queries. So it exposes the OS as a database. What you can do is you can write queries that you're interested in about your endpoints. They run on a schedule, they go into tables, and then you ship the results of those queries to your back end. There are a number of different systems, servers, backends that are designed to ingest OS Query data. Zentral, Fleet, Collide, there are a bunch of them. Just like Munki, I'm going to say Zentral, like, I'm in love with it. When the king speaks, you listen. Zentral just ingests all this data and lets you sort of query data off of other agents' data, and Zentral sort of ingests all the open source tools that we love, so it's really cool. But there are other ones, and really what you want to do is you get your query results to your OS query server, and then you ship them to your logging backend, because OS query is generally point in time. You really want time series data. You want to understand how things are changing over time. So that's the how. What? What do we want to collect? I mentioned we should really be starting with the basics. OS version seems like a basic thing. Sure. If you have OS query installed on your machine, you can type OS query I, and hit return, and it gives you a nice interactive OS query shell. So you can query your own machine and test your queries before you're trying to run them out in the wild on your fleet. And this is a simple one. Select star, select all from OS version. That's it, and it gives you name, version, major, minor, build number, gives you all the stuff you want. And you'll see much later how I use that. I mentioned webhooks, another way to get this data if you're not using OS query and you are using Jamf. You can have Jamf send Splunk a webhook every time a computer checks in, which is super useful. I shared, this should be a very simple query in Splunk, but I'm sharing this because I think there's a cool technique here. I don't understand why this is. I know we have some Jamf people, maybe they can explain it to me afterwards. Sometimes Jamf sends the OS version as 13.5. Sometimes Jamf sends the version as 13.5.0. which, of course, Splunk considers as two different things. So this query sort of figures that out. It uses this eval statement to go figure out if that's padded out correctly. If it's not padded out correctly, it fixes it, and then you get this nice table like this with a column for each version going back across time. As Mac admins, I'm sure some of us, under our breath, from time to time, have muttered, "God damn, Apple." It's not what I'm talking about here, but if it's a way that it helps you remember this, then I'm all for it. What I'm talking about is gdmf.apple.com. If you're not familiar with this, this is the Apple update server. It lists all the current versions of the OS. This is not a hidden thing, and I think I pointed it out in the docs. Use Apple products or on enterprise networks lists this server. It's one of the servers you need to have open to your endpoints. I've been told from a reliable source when I asked them, like, what does that even stand for? I can only think of the thing that I referenced. What does this even stand for? And they said, oh, it's just a randomly generated domain name. That's a heck of a randomly generated domain name, right? So I took 3 minutes, I wrote some crappy Python to go parse the output, and this is in the doc, you don't have to get that down. This will parse GDMF for the latest version of Mac OS. And a few weeks ago, when I wrote these slides and I ran it, that's it. That's the output, 13.5.2. And when did it come out? The 11th of September, 2023. And if we ran that now, we'd get 14 dot whatever it is, 14.0. And what can you do with this? That seems kind of simple, but once you can get this into a script, you can automate things. So this is what I'm doing with it. You can go get the latest version of Mac OS and store that somewhere. I'm storing it in a Splunk lookup table. And then you go through this loop. You compare, you run that once a day in your CI/CD. You go compare it to what's in Splunk. Splunk says they match. Great. Don't do anything. Come back the next day, do it again. But one day, Apple's going to release something new, and it's not going to match. So what can you do? Well, one thing you can do is go set nudge. You can automate your nudge config and say, bump the number, give people 2 weeks, Now we are automatically bugging people to go stay up to date. The other thing you can do is if you're an Okta person and you're using Okta Device Trust, you can manage Okta using Terraform, which means you can automate this. And if you do that, you can do the same sort of thing. You can say, we're going to set this in a month. Now everyone logging in, or whatever your timeline is, now everyone logging in is required to have this particular OS version. Super nice. MDM hiccups. We've probably all experienced this. If you look at machines when you're trying to send out a profile, every now and then there's this group of machines that you check their history and they just have a bunch of profiles queued up. Has everyone seen that, right? Yeah, bunch of hands, right? And you're sending them profiles and nothing. One way I've found to fix this, look, first, it's very often transient, which is great. Their network was a little weird or whatever happened. They reboot, it goes away or whatever. But some machines I've found just get stuck in that state for forever. And you can use Jamf to send the API command of reinstall framework, and that seems to unglue the works. So I have a similar process that I like. I have a CI/CD job that creates a profile every day with the current date in it, and it pushes it out to every machine in my fleet. I use OS Query to read that profile. And then in Jamf, I can go compare how out of date that profile is. So I send the daily profile push every day. I read that profile using OS Query. I send it to Splunk. I have a Splunk alert set up that looks for machines whose profile is 3.5 days, which really makes it like 4 days. 4 days out of date. If they show up on that list, I send it to an Amazon SQS queue with a Lambda job attached to it. The Lambda job goes and pings Jamf and says, hey, go reinstall framework on this machine. So we automate our way out of the pain. A human being doesn't have to be in the loop to deal with that. So yes, I'm showing you how I go read that profile with OS Query, and I'm really only showing it because OS Query has this super cool feature where you can read items fromplists. I love it. Not everything has to go get stored in a formal table. Something can just be a plist on disk, and you can say, give me the value for this key in this plist. And there you go. So in my case, I'm looking for MDM push date, and when I wrote these slides, it was that in the profile on the machine that I was testing. On the back end with Splunk, I think I'm showing this because Splunk, or probably any of the products that you're using on the back end here, usually they extend what you can do with standard SQL. And Splunk does the same thing. They have these eval commands, so you can do a bunch of math right in the SQL. Super cool. So in this case, I'm setting a variable today to now, and then I come back, I get the date from the push, and I look for if it's out of date by more than 302,400 seconds, which is 3.5-ish days. So it's cool. You can do this little math and figure out how that works. And if you run this query in Splunk, I blanked out the computer names to protect the guilty. You get this nice table of machines, and diff column there is how many seconds out of date they are. Software installs. Talked about this one a lot. We've talked about it a lot during the week. There are any number of reasons you want to understand what's happening on your fleet with software installs. As a Mac admin, it's basically your job to kind of understand what's running across your fleet. One reason you might want to understand this more deeply is if you are in a regulated industry. In the US, we have SOC 2 Type 2, and they ask you all these questions, and one of the questions they always ask is, how do you know what's being installed in your fleet, and how do you monitor for unauthorized installs? There might be a number of you that are thinking right now, hey Ed, the A in AICPA stands for American, so we don't have to deal with this. But you probably have to deal with ISO 27001, which asks basically all the same questions. Tell me how you monitor for installs, and how do you know about unauthorized installs? OS Query has two ways of dealing with this, which are super cool. I know that's kind of tiny, you don't have to read everything in there. There's a table in OS Query called Package Install History. Really cool, and in this example, I took out some stuff kind of in the middle, but you can see this machine going all the way from inception at macOS 13.1 to the end where it got upgraded to macOS 14 and doing all the installs in the middle. This is very cool, but as you can imagine, the package installs are scraped from installer.log. And of course, we all know the problem with that. Drag and drop installs and a few other ways of installing software don't show up in that log. So OS Query has this other table called apps. And there's some cool stuff here. I made this sort of large so you can read it. And then let's go zoom in on this. And here's a sample. What shows up in apps? Well, you get an example path, name, bundle executable, bundle identifier, the bundle name itself, the version, the bundle version, the development region. My favorite, AppleScript enabled. That's a super cool one, right? Particularly if you're a security person. We've talked about security a bunch during this week. You would definitely want to know if binaries or apps have AppleScript enabled. And the last time it was opened. And the 2 on the bottom there, -1, means the user has never opened them. And apps is derived from Spotlight. So it collects every app across the machine, no matter how it was installed. If it lists itself as an app via launch services, it goes into this table. And here's a way that I like to use that. Same sort of thing. You run this query for a while, you collect all the apps from every machine across your fleet. You store that in a Splunk lookup table, or whatever your backend does. Then when you want to kind of turn this on, as you're now collecting apps from across the fleet, you compare them to the things in the lookup table. If they match, great, you already knew about them. If they don't match, well, you go do whatever you're going to do. In my case, let's send that to Slack as an alert to say like, hey, this new app showed up on this machine. What do you want to do about it? Maybe you look at it and go, nah, that's right, that's all good. Or maybe it's some weirdo thing that you want to go check out. I mentioned earlier about closing the loop, install errors. This is something we definitely want to have an idea about. And I have repurposed some of the work from SalScripts to send monkey data up into Splunk. So here's an easy way to do that. It shows up as a JSON blob. Splunk breaks that apart into different fields. And the reason I'm showing this example, again, like this isn't a super complex query, but I think this is a cool way to tackle what I'm trying to do is warnings and errors get put into 2 different fields in that JSON blob. I just want to treat them the same. I don't care. So Splunk has this feature where you do a search for something, and then you can come along, whoops, I think I clicked that twice. Yeah, go back. There's an append command, and you can do a second search, and it just sticks it at the end of the results of the first search. So now, yes, I rename warnings in the first one to message, and in the second one, I go rename the other one message. So they're in the same column, and I can treat warnings and errors exactly the same. And then I just say, yeah, show me what's there by serial number. So if there are a bunch of machines reporting the same error, I just see the error once, and then I get a list of all the serial numbers that are having that error installing that package. Hopefully it's short. And you might have noticed the first line there, I'm getting rid of errors that start with could not retrieve, because again, I've found those types of errors to be very transient. Their network had a blip, they closed their lid as it was trying to go get it, whatever. I don't care about those errors that much. Something else I like doing with all this data is cross-checking. Not the fun kind of cross-checking, but cross-checking like a pilot might do. Interesting thing about being a pilot is if you're a nerd, there's no better thing than a plane, right? Buttons and knobs and gauges, and it's great. And once you learn how to read these various dials, a bunch of them are actually telling you the same story. And they should all agree, right? If you have different instruments telling you what your altitude is, they all better agree. And I feel the same way about the instruments that we have on our endpoints. So you have all these agents on your endpoints. You can stick Monkey in there, you can stick CrowdStrike, whatever you're doing. You report them to your backends, and then from there you get them all into Splunk. You all get them into the same backend. And what you can do with this is you cross-check them against each other. Are these agents all telling the same story? Even just down to, are they checking in? And that's kind of one of my favorites. It helps you find broken endpoint agents. And here, I'm going to use the append trick again. So I do this search for machines that are reporting into Jamf. And then I append to that all the machines that are checking into OS Query. And then what's cool there is if a machine is working in a 24-hour period and I dedupe them, in a 24-hour period, I should get 2 entries for that machine. But what I do is I just look for machines that have only reported once. One of their agents is broken. Which one isn't? So I have this nice alert that I run every day that I call Jamf, not OS Query. These are machines that are checking into Jamf, but not OS Query. What's up with these machines? Well, we have to go figure it out. But at least we have insight into the problem. If you are using an IDP, like Okta, like I am, you might want to go check for failed logins, because very often, I mentioned Okta Device Trust, very often we set policies. How do you know you're not blocking people from doing stuff and they're just sitting there confused why they can't log in? So if you change your sign-on policy to allow, or disallow certain things, you should go look for that and make sure you suddenly didn't block a chunk of people who are now confused. How are we all doing? Good, thumbs up. Because if anyone watched videos from this conference during the pandemic, you know I'm a big tea fan. And I was always making fancy tea. So Patrick promised me that he could get me some tea during this event. Oh, and look, here we go. Look how fancy that is. Look how fancy. The banana holder and everything. Wow. Please, thank you very much. That's great. I'm still a big proponent of taking a break. Your break might be taking a walk around the block. I'm big on just get some tea, get up. Tea has that Zen effect of, thank you. It just has that Zen effect of like, you have to wait for it to steep. You can't rush it. It's just the way it works. Anyway, so I asked earlier what. I gave some examples, but I can't give you all the examples. You're going to have to use your imagination, because if you go into OS Query I, and this is actually a few revisions old, I think, and you type .tables, you will get this enormous list of tables that OS Query supports. And at this time, it was 181 tables. And I know they've added more since I've done this. And thanks to some of the great work from the Mac admin community, a bunch of very Mac-specific tables have been put into OS Query by default. I think, Graham, you might have been involved in that. Maybe? No? You were Sal Scripps, though. Yes, so thank you for that. I should have mentioned that earlier. So anyway, whoever were the people involved with that, thank you very much. So I can't tell you what, but maybe we could just figure out what else. What other types of things can we do with data as we're collecting it? Well, speaking of Graham, I know you mentioned user stories. So that's one thing that's important to do with all this data. Who are we serving? Well, our end users. Can we use this data that we're collecting to make sure that we are serving our end users? And there could be a bunch of ways to do that. Probably the most simple is, if you have something set as an optional install, but you notice maybe 90% of your machines end up having that software package, maybe you put it in by default instead of making people go chase it down. Or if you leave a default setting and you notice most people flip it the other way, well, go make it the default and just make things easy for people. Another thing we can do with this is looking at device posture. And we've had a number of security talks and people talking about conditional access. Yeah, this is super cool. I am really more and more of the opinion that, maybe IT and security shouldn't be the same exact department, but they really, really are so much more closely aligned than we've thought in the past. So whether it's device posture or anything else, if you're collecting all this data, your security team will be super interested in it. If you are your security team, you should be super interested in it. But if you do have a separate security team, they will probably be really interested in like 90% of the same data. It's all kind of useful. And then some of my favorite stuff to do with this are dashboards for a number of reasons. First, it's a way to share your data with people that it's kind of easy for them to digest, right? And they look so nice. This is Splunk. It just looks so nice. And anyone can sort of look at this and reason about it. The labels are kind of small, but up top is the Mac OS version's 7-day actives. And this, again, was a few weeks ago. But it's so cool to see this stuff evolve over time. So here's Chrome, and you can see just when this graph started, this old version was dying out and this new version came in, and it lasted for a little bit, and then that kind of died out and this new version was coming in. And you see the same thing with your Fleet OS versions over time. Super cool. I was on Point today, or whenever I ran this, and Jamf 24-hour check-ins and Santa 24-hour check-ins matched to the number. Fantastic. But having a dashboard just makes it really easy to reason about. Here's another one that's really easy to reason about. Everyone wants to know, or at least auditors always want to know, hey, do you have File Vault on your machines? I go, yeah, that big solid circle? Yes, no machines are unencrypted. And this bottom one was just sort of like an arbitrary chart that I use. I don't know if anyone does anything similar. Dev are machines that are used by developers, and the other one, SBO, are my standard build out. And I just kind of want to know how that looks at any given time. Mac OS endpoint stats, here's another one by Jamf. I can take that information that I was talking about earlier, where I detect MDM pushes are failing. Yeah, there were 15 at that time that dashboard was running. 15 machines that aren't getting new profiles, or they have some problem receiving commands from MDM. Not cool. We want to minimize that. And then here's hardware models over time. So I guess whatever that is, the 16-inch 2021 is the most popular machine in the fleet. And then, of course, yeah, what do you do with this data? You don't want a human sitting down and looking at a dashboard all the time to make sure, or just manually running queries to understand. You can automate your alerts. So if any of these values change, you can alert on them. And then you can take your alerts and do whatever's appropriate. Email, Slack, PagerDuty, automations, like I mentioned before. You can take, at least from Splunk, you can take the results of an alert, ship them off somewhere like AWS, and have some automation run. Or you can do all/some of the above. And then here's something that's actually important. You want to have alerts on your alerts. How do you know the alerts are working. So I have a number of alerts in Splunk that I run that look for impossible values. So they don't fire often, but one fired 2 weeks ago for me, which was I look for fewer than 50 machines checking into OS Query. And sure enough, our pipeline had broken. It wasn't OS Query that was still reporting in, and it wasn't our back end that was still working, but the pipeline that shipped it to Splunk was broken. So it's nice to have alerts that look for like, hey, this thing should never happen, ideally. So here's the alert that I'm running. Super simple. This is one on Jamf. And if the webhooks, it detects how many machines are sending webhooks over a 24-hour period, and you just stuff them in a table, and then Splunk can look at that table, say, how many results are there? And your alert can say, well, if there are fewer than whatever makes sense to you, you go alert on it. So, I said it earlier, get the foundations right. That's the important part. Get the foundations right. The fancy stuff can come later. And how do you do that? Monitor, alerting, automation. Close the loop. Monitor, alerting, automation. Close the loop. Monitoring, alerting, automation. Close the loop. Thank you.